Hi, my name is Keegan Miller, and this is my final presentation for criminal procedures with Professor Akers. This project was started on August 7th and finished on August 9th. The case that I chose for my final presentation is the case of Terry versus Ohio, one that I feel very familiar with and comfortable with since I have had it covered in at least 3 other courses so far. The facts of the case are that Terry and 2 others were observed by an undercover policeman to be casing a job. The officer then stopped and frisked all 3 on reasonable suspicion, finding weapons on 2 of them. As a result, Terry was convicted for carrying a concealed weapon and sentenced to 3 years in prison for the offense. This brought into question whether the search and seizures were constitutional in nature under the Fourth Amendment or not, ultimately requiring judicial review by the U.S. Supreme Court. This would ultimately become a landmark case for searches and seizures and their constitutionality under the Fourth Amendment. The Supreme Court eventually ruled in a near-unanimous decision that the search was indeed valid under the Fourth Amendment, upholding the initial court's ruling in sentencing. In order to highlight the reasoning behind their decision, the court focused on the specific facts of the case and stated that the officer in this case was acting on reasonable suspicion, not a random hunch, and that a reasonably prudent man would have been warranted in believing Terry was armed and thus presented a threat to the officer's safety while he was investigating his suspicious behavior. This case affects law enforcement and our society as a whole in a variety of ways. First of all, it established a standard for valid and constitutional searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. This provides law enforcement with a baseline for what they can do under the Fourth Amendment regarding searches and seizures. It also allows society to have a better understanding of when searches and seizures by officers are legal or not. Additionally, it provided baselines for judicial reviews. As new cases regarding searches and seizures and their constitutionality were brought before the U.S. Supreme Court, the court then had Terry v. Ohio to look back to and use for their benefit in deciding these future cases. It also allowed police officers to make searches and seizures based on reasonable suspicion, replacing the long-held standard that such searches and seizures were only valid after having probable cause. This meant that officers could more easily conduct searches and seizures, which could in turn lead to easier warrantless arrests. For society, this meant the same, that the threat of a search and a seizure and possible subsequent arrest could happen more easily and with less requirements than before. Naturally, this change brought about the concern that officers would be able to conduct these searches and seizures, possibly even in a reckless or abusive manner. However, this concern was addressed by departmental requirements that officers be able to articulate in a detailed and narrative-styled manner everything that led to them establishing reasonable suspicion and conducting the search and seizure. They could not check off boxes to complete this requirement. Ultimately, this change added new, easier-to-meet requirements for constitutionally valid searches and seizures, making police work slightly easier. To counteract the concerns of society, they were required to be able to articulate what allowed them to establish reasonable suspicion. Terry v. Ohio was a landmark case for these reasons and helped judicial review as well in the future. Terry v. Ohio was extremely influential case. Taking all of the facts into account and the outcome of the case, I believe that the Supreme Court made the best decision in allowing the search and seizure to stand. It clearly influenced and still influences a lot of police decisions today. It also provided a constitutionally valid baseline for searches and seizures that police departments can go off of, as well for the Supreme Court to base judicial decisions on. And giving officers a new, easier-to-meet requirement, they also provided them with a better way to ensure officer safety in the field. By establishing the constitutionality of the search and seizure as used in Terry v. Ohio, the Supreme Court set up police departments with a tool to conduct these searches and seizures and avoid prosecution, while giving them more protection. This ruling has been more beneficial than detrimental, and I think it was one of the best rulings in a landmark case by the Supreme Court. I think that the ruling was the best outcome, and I would not change a thing about how the case was ruled, and that by giving officers the tools they need, the overall safety of the police and community alike were increased. Thank you.